Amara lived quietly in her husband's family house, always trying to please her mother-in-law. But nothing she did was ever enough. One evening, after another round of harsh insults, her mother-in-law stood before everyone and called her useless. Without hesitation, she ordered Amara to pack her things and leave the house immediately. Humiliated, with tears in her eyes, Amara carried her small bag and walked out, not knowing where to go. Her husband said nothing, only watched as she was pushed out like a stranger. Everyone in the family whispered that she came into the marriage with nothing and deserved nothing. Amara kept silent, but she was hiding a secret that no one in that family knew. Her late aunt, who had loved her dearly, had left behind a beautiful mansion in the city. Amara had never spoken about it because she did not want to brag or live proudly. She thought her marriage was her new home, but after the cruel treatment she faced, she decided it was time to take back her dignity. A few days later, the same family that threw her out was shocked when Amara drove past their street in a car they had never seen before. She stopped only for a moment, stepped out gracefully, and with calm confidence, announced she was on her way to her new home. Curiosity filled their eyes, and some followed her. To their greatest surprise, she stopped at a tall iron gate and pulled out a set of keys. As the gate swung open, their mouths fell open. A grand mansion, more beautiful than anything they had ever owned, stood before them. Amara smiled as she walked inside, her steps filled with quiet pride. Servants greeted her with respect, and she turned around to see her husband's family still standing at the gate, speechless. Suddenly, the same mother-in-law who had insulted her so cruelly only days before was begging to step inside. The same people who called her useless were now pleading for her forgiveness and asking if they could stay with her. Amara did not need to say much. Her new life spoke louder than any insult they had ever thrown at her. The woman they once rejected now held the keys not only to a mansion but also to their shame. Bucola is mocked and thrown out by her mother-in-law, who never liked her from the start. Every little mistake was turned into an insult, and every silence was used against her. One afternoon, in front of neighbors and relatives, her mother-in-law raised her voice, calling her a burden and saying she was a shame to their family. Her husband stood quietly, refusing to defend her, and Bucola was told to leave with nothing. Tears rolled down her face as she picked up her bag, her heart breaking at the humiliation. People whispered that she came with empty hands, so it was easy to push her away. But Bucola carried a truth she had never shared. Her grandfather, a wealthy and respected man, had always loved her deeply. Before his passing, he left behind a vast estate, acres of land, houses and wealth, all under her name. She had chosen to keep it private, wanting to live humbly in her marriage, but the cruel treatment she faced changed everything. She decided it was time to show them who she truly was. Days later, her husband's family heard rumors spreading through town about a woman moving into the largest estate in the area. They laughed at the story, never imagining it was Bucola. But their laughter ended when they saw her arrive at the grand gates in a black car, her presence commanding attention. With steady hands, she pulled out the heavy keys, and in front of a growing crowd, she unlocked the gates. Slowly, the massive doors opened to reveal a breathtaking property, gardens, houses, and wealth far greater than anything her husband's family had ever dreamed of. Her mother-in-law, who once pushed her away with harsh words, was now left trembling. Shock covered every face as they realized the same woman they threw out had become untouchable. Relatives who once turned their backs now rushed forward, trying to smile and act kind, pretending to care. Her husband, who never spoke up for her, stood frozen, realizing he had lost not just a wife but also every chance to share in her fortune. Bucola walked inside with grace, her head high, as workers bowed to her. The same family who mocked her now begged for her forgiveness, asking if they could be a part of her life again. But the gates closed behind her, leaving them outside in shame, while Bucola claimed the respect she had always deserved. Kayamika's Emil humiliates her, saying she has nothing, and her words cut deep in front of everyone. At the family dinner, she laughed loudly, mocking her for being poor, and called her a woman who only came into the marriage to eat from others. Even her husband sat in silence, allowing the cruel words to echo around the room. Humiliated, Kayamika lowered her head and quietly left, carrying the pain of being disrespected in a place she thought was her home. Everyone around believed she was truly worthless, but no one knew she had been carrying a powerful secret. Her late father, a man of wisdom and wealth, had left her something priceless. Among his last gifts to her was full ownership of a luxury hotel in the heart of the city. Kayamika never spoke about it, because she wanted love and respect to come from her character, not her wealth. But after being dragged down by insults and treated like dirt, she decided the time had come to reveal her true worth. A few days later, when her husband's family was relaxing and mocking her absence, Kayamika arrived at a grand luxury hotel everyone admired, but could never afford. Dressed with grace, she walked to the massive glass doors, pulling out official ownership papers. Hotel staff rushed forward to greet her with bows and smiles. She reached into her bag, brought out her keys, and unlocked the private entrance reserved only for the owner. Cameras flashed, and people gasped as they realized what was happening. The same woman who had been called poor was actually the rightful owner of one of the finest hotels in the city. News spread quickly, and within hours, her husband's family appeared at the hotel lobby, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Her mother-in-law, who once mocked her for having nothing, stood speechless, her pride shattered. The same relatives who laughed at her days ago were now smiling nervously, trying to act friendly, begging her to forgive them. Even her husband looked around in shame, realizing he had failed her when she needed support the most. Kayamika walked through the shining lobby, employees greeting her with respect and honor, while her in-laws stood frozen, unable to believe the truth. She didn't need to shout or argue. Her actions spoke louder. The woman they tried to break now owned the very place they could never reach, and for the first time, they understood she had always been more powerful than they ever imagined. Ijeoma is called barren and kicked out by her mother-in-law, who never missed a chance to remind her that she had not given the family a child. In front of neighbors and relatives, her mother-in-law shouted that she was a curse, a disgrace, and had no place in their home. Her husband stood quietly, refusing to say a word, and Ijeoma was thrown out with her small bag, her heart breaking from the humiliation. She walked away in silence, not defending herself, disappearing from their sight for days. Everyone whispered that she had nothing and would never survive on her own. But Ijeoma carried a truth no one in that house knew. Her late father, a respected businessman, had built a powerful real estate empire. Before he passed, he had named her the rightful heir, but she kept it hidden, choosing to live humbly with her husband. When she was cast out, she finally decided to claim what was hers. With determination in her heart, she stepped into her father's office, signed the final documents, and became the official CEO of the company that owned some of the biggest properties in the city. Days later, her husband's family was shocked when they saw expensive cars rolling through the neighborhood. To their greatest surprise, Ijeoma stepped out, dressed with elegance, her presence stronger than ever. Behind her walked lawyers, staff members, and security, all showing her respect. Without saying a word, she pulled out the golden keys to a massive mansion, one her father had left for her, and unlocked the grand doors in front of everyone. The gates swung open, revealing luxury and wealth far beyond anything her husband's family had ever touched. Her mother-in-law, who once shouted that she was barren and worthless, now stood speechless. Her husband, who had failed to defend her, looked on in regret, realizing he had lost the most valuable person in his life. Neighbors gathered, whispering in shock, as Ijeoma walked inside with confidence, staff following her, ready to serve. The same family that pushed her away now begged to be allowed inside, asking for her forgiveness. Ijeoma did not need to argue or shout. Her new life spoke for her. She was no longer the woman they mocked. She was the CEO, the true heir, and the owner of a mansion that placed her far above those who once despised her. Neoma's Emil humiliates her, calling her worthless in front of the entire family. She shouted that Neoma brought nothing into the marriage, no money, no value, and no respect. Her cruel words cut deep, and her husband did nothing to stop the insults. Neighbors and relatives watched as she was pushed aside like she meant nothing, and whispers spread that she had no future. With tears in her eyes, Neoma left quietly, carrying the pain of rejection, but also carrying a truth no one around her knew. For years, she had kept her identity hidden. Her father, a powerful politician with influence across the state, had always protected her from greedy people. To keep her safe, he advised her never to reveal who she truly was. But after the cruel humiliation from her mother-in-law, Neoma decided it was time to stop hiding. She returned to her father's circle, welcomed by guards, advisors, and staff who treated her like royalty. Within days, her life transformed as her father handed her the keys to a grand mansion built with power and wealth. Days later, when her husband's family saw a convoy of black cars and armed soldiers passing through the streets, they never imagined Neoma was inside. Their shock grew when the vehicles stopped at a massive gate not far from their own home. Soldiers stepped out, saluted, and opened the door for her. Neoma walked gracefully, her confidence shining, as she pulled out the keys to the mansion. The giant gates opened, and the breathtaking view of the property left everyone speechless. The once worthless woman was now revealed as someone far greater than they ever dreamed. Her mother-in-law, who once mocked her, stood frozen with fear and shame. Her husband, who never defended her, looked on helplessly, realizing he had lost the trust and respect of a woman with unimaginable power. Neighbors whispered, pointing at the guards who surrounded the mansion, making it clear that she was untouchable. Neoma entered her home with pride, staff bowing before her, soldiers guarding every corner, while her in-laws stood at the gate, begging to be let in. The same family that once threw harsh words now pleaded for her kindness. She didn't need to argue or fight. Her true identity spoke louder than any insult. She was not worthless. She was the daughter of a powerful politician, and her life would never again be measured by their cruel judgment. Onika is dragged out of her husband's house by her mother-in-law, who had never liked her from the first day. In front of relatives and neighbors, she was pushed out, her clothes scattered on the ground as if she was nothing. Her mother-in-law shouted that she was a burden, a woman with no value, and warned her never to return. Her husband stood in silence, watching his wife's humiliation without lifting a finger. Onika walked away quietly, her heart breaking, but she refused to beg. Everyone believed she was gone for good, a woman with nowhere to go. What no one knew was that Onika carried a powerful secret. Her late father, a man of wealth and respect, had built a massive oil company. Before his passing, he had secured her future, leaving her as the true heir. She never spoke of it, choosing to live humbly in her marriage. But the cruel rejection from her husband's family pushed her to step into her rightful place. She vanished for a week, meeting with the company's board, signing papers, and taking full control of her inheritance. A week later, the same family that mocked her stood in shock when black SUVs and company officials arrived at their street. Out of one of the cars stepped Onika, dressed with elegance and strength. Behind her were executives and staff, all ready to serve her. She walked with calm confidence to the gates of a huge mansion nearby. With a set of shining keys, she unlocked the doors as security bowed in respect. The gates opened wide, revealing a grand estate built from her oil inheritance, more beautiful than anything her husband's family had ever dreamed of owning. Gasps filled the air as neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. Her mother-in-law, who once dragged her out with insults, now trembled with regret. Her husband stood frozen, realizing he had lost a woman whose power and wealth outshone the entire family. Onika's steps were firm as she entered her mansion, staff welcoming her home, showing her the honor she deserved. The family who once threw her away now begged to be allowed inside, their pride shattered. But Onika no longer needed their approval. Her silence had turned into strength, her pain into power. She was no longer the helpless woman they pushed away. She was the oil heiress, the true owner of wealth they could never touch. Adayabi's Emile throws her out, claiming she came empty-handed and had nothing to offer the family. In front of relatives, she shouted that Adayabi was a shame, a woman who brought no value into the marriage. Her belongings were tossed into the street as if she were a stranger. Her husband stood silently, refusing to defend her, and neighbors watched as she walked away with tears in her eyes. People whispered that she had no wealth, no background, and no future. But Adayabi carried a secret that no one around her knew. Her late father, a wealthy businessman, had always loved her dearly and made sure she would never suffer in life. Before he passed, he left her a priceless inheritance, a mansion decorated with diamonds and wealth beyond imagination. She kept it hidden, never speaking about it, because she wanted her marriage to be built on love, not money. But after being humiliated and rejected, she decided it was time to reveal what she truly had. Days later, the same family that mocked her was shocked when a convoy of cars pulled into the city's wealthiest neighborhood. Adayabi stepped out, dressed with elegance, flanked by lawyers holding important papers. Neighbors and strangers gathered to watch as she walked gracefully to the tall gates of a stunning mansion. With a calm smile, she handed the documents to security, proving her rightful ownership. Slowly, the gates opened, and the breathtaking house appeared, its walls decorated with sparkling diamonds, shining under the sun like treasure. Gasps of disbelief filled the air. The same woman who was called poor was now revealed as the owner of a mansion more luxurious than anything her husband's family had ever dreamed of. Her mother-in-law, who once shouted that she came empty-handed, was left speechless. Her husband's face turned pale, realizing the woman he failed to protect had more power than his entire family combined. Ayanda stepped inside with confidence, greeted by staff who bowed before her. The lawyers confirmed her ownership, leaving no room for doubt. The family who once mocked her now stood outside the gates, begging for forgiveness, pretending to smile, and asking to be let in. But Ayanda no longer needed their approval. She had her father's gift, her dignity and her strength. The mansion was hers, and so was the respect they could never take away again. Ayanda is mocked by her mil for being jobless, and the words sting like fire. At the family gathering, her mother-in-law sneered loudly, saying she was nothing but a burden who depended on her son. She went further, saying a woman without work had no place in their home. Before Ayanda could defend herself, her mother-in-law ordered her out, dragging her bags into the street. Her husband stood there silently, his eyes avoiding hers, offering no protection as neighbors watched her humiliation. With tears in her eyes, Ayanda walked away, carrying only her belongings and her pain. What no one knew was that Ayanda was far from jobless. Her late father had been a successful businessman who invested heavily in the aviation industry. Before his passing, he named her the rightful majority shareholder of a growing airline. She had kept it a secret, choosing to live quietly with her husband, believing her marriage was built on love. But being kicked out broke her completely, and she decided it was time to take her rightful place. Weeks later, the same family that mocked her was stunned when they saw headlines spreading across the city. Pictures of Ayanda signing airline documents with top executives filled the news. But their shock deepened when she returned to town in a convoy of black cars. She stepped out near the airport, elegant and confident, surrounded by company officials. She walked to the gates of a grand luxury mansion standing proudly near the runway. With her own set of keys, she unlocked the massive doors, and staff rushed to greet her respectfully. The house was breathtaking, its windows shining under the sun, and planes could be seen taking off in the distance. Neighbors gathered in awe, whispering as they realized Ayanda was not only wealthy, but also one of the most powerful women in the city. Her mother-in-law, who once called her jobless, stood speechless, unable to process the truth. Her husband looked on in regret, realizing he had lost the woman he once underestimated. Ayanda entered her mansion with grace, staff bowing to her authority. The family that once mocked her now begged at the gates, pretending to smile, desperate to be close to her again. But she no longer needed their approval. She had her dignity, her inheritance, and her power. The woman they insulted was now the airline queen. Soaring far above their reach, Chidinma's mil insults her at a birthday gathering and kicks her out, making her feel small in front of everyone. With guests still seated, her mother-in-law raised her voice, calling her a disgrace and accusing her of bringing nothing but shame into the family. The laughter and whispers around the room only made it worse, and before Chidinma could say a word, she was ordered to leave immediately. Her husband stood frozen, refusing to defend her as she walked out in tears, carrying only her pride. Neighbors and relatives shook their heads, believing she had no future. But Chidinma carried a truth no one in that family knew. Her late father had been one of the most successful landlords in the city, owning countless houses and buildings. Before his passing, he secured her future, leaving her the largest share of his estate. She never spoke about it, because she wanted to live humbly and quietly in her marriage. But after the humiliation, she knew it was time to stand tall and reclaim her worth. Days later, the same family gathered outside, still gossiping about how worthless she was, when a luxury car pulled up next door. To their shock, Chidinma stepped out, elegant and confident, surrounded by lawyers and estate managers. Without saying a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out the keys, and unlocked the massive gates of the mansion right beside theirs. As the doors opened, neighbors gasped, unable to believe the beautiful home belonged to her. Inside, staff greeted her warmly, bowing as they welcomed her back. The mansion sparkled with wealth and beauty, proof of the inheritance she had been given. News spread quickly, and soon people were whispering that Chidinma was not only the owner of the property, but also the landlord controlling rent across half the city. The same woman who had been mocked and insulted was now revealed as a powerful property owner. Her mother-in-law stood frozen, her pride shattered. Her husband's face turned pale as he realized he had failed to defend the very woman who held more power than his entire family. Relatives who once laughed now tried to smile at her, begging to be welcomed back into her good graces. But Chidinma walked through her gates with her head high, leaving them behind in shame. She no longer needed their approval. She had the mansion, the wealth, and the respect they could never take away. Ezin's humiliation began on a sunny afternoon when her mother-in-law, in front of relatives and neighbors, raised her voice and called her useless. She was accused of bringing no value to the family, of being a burden, and of having nothing to her name. Before she could defend herself, she was dragged out of the house in shame, with everyone whispering and laughing. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she walked away, holding on to her dignity even while her heart was breaking. The words pierced deeper than any knife, but she kept silent, carrying the insult quietly, because she knew something no one else did. Only a few days later, the scene shifted. The same relatives were relaxing by the seaside, enjoying the luxury and beauty of a well-known resort where the family had gathered for a vacation. Everyone was talking, laughing, and once again treating Ezin as if she had no place among them. Then, without a word, she walked past the crowd with steady steps, keys in her hand, and moved straight toward the grand seaside mansion near the shore. The sound of the lock turning echoed, and when the door opened, every face froze. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Her mother-in-law's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you doing with that house?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Ezin finally spoke, calm and firm. She revealed that the mansion was hers, part of an inheritance she had kept hidden. And that was not all. With quiet authority, she told them she was not just the owner of the seaside mansion, but also co-owner of the luxury resort where they were staying. Every room they had booked, every service they had enjoyed, every bill they thought they were paying elsewhere, flowed back into her pocket. The shock was overwhelming. Relatives who had mocked her days before now stared in silence, ashamed of their laughter. Her mother-in-law, who had called her useless and thrown her out, stood speechless, her pride shattered in front of everyone. Ezin smiled softly, her dignity fully restored, and walked into her mansion with grace. The same woman once dragged out in disgrace now stood taller than them all, her power undeniable, her worth beyond question. Bustias. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. Bye.